The annual Florida-Georgia matchup wrote its latest chapter on Saturday afternoon, and for the third time in as many years, the game was controlled by the Georgia Bulldogs. The two-time reigning national champion Georgia Bulldogs took it to the Florida Gators, who are in the process of a rebuild at the moment under Billy Napier, and that was very evident from start to finish on Saturday. I'm Brandon Carroll, your host here at CARROLL'S Cadence, and today I just wanted to take a little bit of time, not too long. It's not going to be your average long 30-minute plus episode, but just to kind of share my thoughts on this matchup and give some of the off-the-cuff reactions from this game and observations that I had covering it from press row at Everbank Stadium for allgators.com, the Sports Illustrated Fan Nation affiliate that I work for, aside from my YouTube cover. Before we get into all that, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below your thoughts on this matchup and how Florida you think they'll fare moving forward. And before, again, I really jump into what I want to discuss from this matchup specifically, I think it's important to understand the team that Florida played on Saturday afternoon. Now, I'm not going to sit here and give excuses for the performance because there was a need to be more prepared than they were. There was a need to execute better than they did. However, you go from a contest against South Carolina where they did so many things that they haven't been able to do in quite some time to give some optimism for their season forward. I don't think that should change because of a dominant victory by the two-time reigning national champions and a team that's going to contend once again, not just to win the SEC, but also to win another national title and become the first team in college football to win 3 straight. So just getting that out there, getting that out in the open, because it's important to kind of not ride this wave of up and down based on expectations, based off one game or another. You should take it a more of a big picture look and see how they perform game in and game out. I still feel that Florida is winning games that they should, and they're losing games that they probably should lose. So they're just kind of in the middle of that rebuild and still on the earlier side is really what we learned from this contest on Saturday. But one of the big things that I want to talk about is that first Florida offensive drive, because that was the moment where a lot of people kind of sat up in their seats and said, oh, we might have a game here. This might be a contest, because it was beautifully well designed. It was well scripted, and it was well executed by the Florida offense. They moved the ball meticulously down the field, but they did it efficiently, and they used wide receiver Eugene Wilson III to be able to do it, who has been really their most dynamic playmaker on offense throughout this season. Obviously, you have Trevor Etienne, you have Ricky Pearsall, but if you have a guy that you want to get in space and just give him the football and let him work, it's Trey Wilson. He's the dude, and I think he provided in a game filled with negatives. You can look at what Trey Wilson did on that first drive and really the game as a whole, even though his production significantly decreased after that initial possession. You can look at him and say, that's a significant building block for the future of this offense, because it's not easy to go out there and have 4 receptions and 64 yards, I believe, and a score on the first possession of the game against a defense that has been dominant over the past 3 seasons. It's not what it was in 2021 when it was arguably the best defense we've ever seen in college football, both statistically and from the eye test. But it's still no slouch. It's still a Kirby Smart defense. And while they might not be what they once were, it's still a top 15, 20 defense in the country. So it's difficult to be able to go and do that. And Eugene Wilson III had immense success on that first possession. Obviously, Will Muschamp was able to correct that after that. And that's when it started to snowball for Florida. But the flowers, if there are any to give out for the Gators, it should go to Eugene Wilson III for what he was able to do in that first possession. And he became the first freshman in Florida history to record double-digit receptions in that contest. So he is a massive building block. He is a piece that they will look to utilize in high volume throughout the rest of this season and going into the 2024-2025, and if he decides to stay beyond that, those seasons in orange and blue. So the biggest thing for me outside of that, and now we get is where we're getting into the negatives. Florida goes up 7-0 against the Georgia Bulldogs. They go down and score 7-3. And even though it was a stop defensively, Georgia moved pretty well on that drive. So you knew Florida needed to come back out on the field and produce in a form similar to the first drive. It didn't necessarily need to be as as well oiled as it was, but it surely needed to result in points. And it looked as if that was going to be the case. Florida moved the ball pretty significantly, well to that 50-yard line. It was 1st and 10 at the 50. And then they started to get cute. And I think that was the biggest thing early in this game is we saw the talent gap appear later. And that probably would have resulted in Georgia winning anyway. It would have resulted in the same outcome in the win and loss columns. But when you take a look at how this team performed in those first 2 drives, it looked as if Florida just had a little bit to give the Georgia Bulldogs. It looked as if they just had a little sliver of juice to kind of make it more of a game than it was. But ultimately, to me, seeing how that played out, the talent gap wasn't the reason Georgia scored 36 unanswered. It was Florida getting ahead of themselves and understanding that talent gap was present and feeling as if they needed to get out ahead of it. So 1st and 10 at the 50. All right. That's not the opportunity. You want to take a big shot. You want to try to get these explosive plays, but there's a double reverse that results in a loss that pushes them behind the sticks. And now you got a 2nd and long trying to work back against a pass rush that might not be as productive as it has been in the past for Georgia, but it's still going to get pressure in Graham Mertz's face. And it did throughout the day. So you have that. You have a minimal run on 2nd down and then a sack on 3rd down, which really derails that 2nd drive, gives the ball back to Georgia, and allows that offense that was ticking on the 1st drive that got stalled in the end zone another opportunity to get after it with a chance to take the lead. They did that. They came back out. Carson Beck was firing on all cylinders, and then he throws a strike over the middle to Ladd McConkey. Ladd McConkey takes it, spins out of, really there wasn't anyone too close to him, but there were 5 dudes within the vicinity of him that probably should have brought him down, but they didn't. He spins out of it, takes it 41 yards, touchdown Georgia. They take that 10-7 lead, and that completely deflates Florida. And I think just having that, trying to get cute, trying not to do what's working, because Florida was running the football well, they were passing the football well, and trying to just pull out of the bag of tricks is, to me, getting ahead of themselves and not trusting what was working at that point. Understanding that the talent gap was present, but it wasn't necessarily at a point yet where Florida needed to try to do those things to get out in front and win this football game. And then on that drive after the Ladd McConkey score, which brought them up 10-7, shifted momentum significantly in Georgia's favor, Florida gets put in a 4th and 1 situation after. There was some questions about the spot for Khalil Jackson on his 3rd down catch. They were saying, if was he past the line to gain or not. Whether you want to argue that or not is what it is. But in the situation that they were given, it's at 4th and 1. And instead of, obviously, Georgia with the talent that they have up front, which I'll touch on in a second, they're going to kind of gear up to stop a quarterback sneak. But they're also ready for alternate play calls to come in, because they understand Florida might know that, or they might think, hey, they got some dudes in that front line. We can't afford to try to push forward into them because we might get stopped. That's what Billy Napier was thinking, because you go and look at how this shaked out. 4th and 1 comes up. It's the end of the quarter, hops into the 2nd quarter. They have plenty of time throughout the break from 1st to 2nd to discuss it over. And instead of going with a quick handoff from under center or a QB sneak, they pull out another bag of tricks where Kingsley Eguakun snaps the ball underneath Graham Mertz's legs. It goes to Trevor Etienne, who has a run-pass option on the play. He's 5-7 yards back from the line of scrimmage, and Georgia sniffs it out. They know exactly what's going on, and they stay home. They stay collected. They stay just opportunistic to be able to get this stop, and the ball goes from being at the UF 34 to the UF 31 after the loss of 3 by ETN, and it sets Georgia up in scoring territory already to go up 17-7. And then on the next possession, there's a fumble, and then the blocked kick to go into halftime, 26-7, like that. Come out of halftime, 10 more points. It is a 36-7 game in a flash. Obviously, there were opportunities for Florida to cut that margin, But you have 2 straight possessions where, you're getting stopped or your things aren't working. You're getting pushed behind the sticks against a Georgia team where the margin for error, and Billy Napier said this after the game, the margin for error was very, very low. And everyone knew that going in. I said that going in. They could not turn the ball over. They could not have these mental lapses. They could not kind of hurt themselves the way they did because it would get ugly quickly. And that's exactly how this game played out. Because you have that failed double reverse with Eugene Wilson and Ricky Pearsall, resulting in a loss of like 6 or something like that. And then, you go and you have the 4th down, this ordeal where probably should have just tried to muscle your way for a few inches, because it was 4th and inches. It wasn't 4th and 1. I said 4th and 1, but it was 4th and a ball length, really. And you just try to muscle that in there, you potentially get another set of downs, and you're able to kind of at least prolong the inevitable defeat. It doesn't rattle off the way it did. But Florida, after that point, it unraveled for Florida. They had a fumble in the next possession, and it just started going, giving Georgia the ball at like their 11, and it significantly got out of hand. And really, by the time it was 24-7, even before the blocked punt, there was no hope for Florida to come back. The momentum was completely in Georgia's favor. And in a game like that, with 2 teams that are at significantly different points in their programs, you can't afford to have that play out the way it did. To me, having it play out the way it did, outside of Florida's own mistakes, outside of what Florida did to hurt themselves, I mentioned the talent gap, how it was noticeable between the 2 squads of, okay, Georgia has the dudes, and we know Georgia has the dudes, but they have guys at every position, all throughout special teams as well, that are serving at such a high level, playing at such a high level for their squad that it makes it difficult. And that's what makes the margin for error so small. Well, the point where, Florida had some guys like Eugene Wilson or Ricky Pearsall that showed that, okay, maybe they can contend with some of the secondary pieces of Georgia. But where Florida had just not a soul contend outside of Princely Umamielen at times was in the trenches. They did not have anyone that could contend with Georgia on offense. Georgia was opening holes for Dejon Edwards, keeping Carson Beck's jersey clean, and Florida's pass rush was rendered relatively ineffective throughout that game. You saw Princely have some success crashing down against the run. I thought they ran it away from him a lot, which if you've watched Florida football this season, it makes sense to run away from Princely because of how dynamic he can be. However, there's also times where he struggles to set the edge. So maybe running toward him is also a, positive for other teams. But when they were running away from him, he was crashing down and making tackles at an effective clip. And then on the other side of the football, Florida's offense, the line, which has only played 3 games together all season long because of Kingsley Eguakun's move in and out of the lineup, and that's not to mention the suspensions of Damian George and Micah Mazuka, and just the mixing and matching that's gone on with the Gators offensive line throughout the year, and the significant regression that it's had because of that mixing and matching. It was not good at all. It was to put it lightly, it got dominated by that Georgia front, because every single play on a Georgia team that, yes, they create pressure, but they have not been that productive throughout the year. They had 4 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, and 2 forced fumbles on Florida. 4 sacks on Graham Mertz, both forced fumbles coming against Mertz, Damian George recovering one of them. And, it got out of hand very quickly on both sides. And it started with that line of scrimmage. And that's not to mention the blocked punt, where Florida had 2 midline protectors in that punt coverage, and Georgia noticed that, and the players checked into a punt block, and they are ultimately able to get it with Jonel Aguero, who Florida actually recruited out of high school and was one of the teams that Aguero was considering getting the block, and it resulted in the safety to take it 26-7 heading into the halftime break ultimately. So just little things like that to me were so big in this contest, just seeing the difference there, seeing how important it is for Florida to continue moving forward and accumulating that talent. But also, it also just kind of creates this idea that even when Florida gets this 2024 class in, which is ranked third in the country right now in 2024 on 247 Sports Composite, you look at how many guys that Georgia has compared to Florida, and 2024's class will not even become close to being enough, despite having 3 5-stars and a all-world quarterback in DJ Lagway, who continues to light it up on the Texas high school scene. Produced even, just another stellar performance in their first playoff game this past weekend on Saturday, I believe. So you just have so many different pieces that are coming in for Florida, but Saturday showed that it is still a 2 to 3 to potentially even 4-year process for the Gators to come even close to defeating Georgia on the field. Because like I said, this is a team that is difficult to beat. The margin for error is tiny. No team has figured it out in the past 25 tries to beat the Georgia Bulldogs. And so to beat them on the field it starts in doing so off the field. You have to beat them on the recruiting trail. And Florida started to do that in some battles. They've started to kind of up their game in that aspect, but that's only a minuscule part of it. And they have to do so rapidly and consistently in order to make what has once been a back and forth historic rivalry between these two teams back into that, rather than being a game where Georgia is favored by 14.5 going in. And, there's really the buzz down in Jacksonville wasn't what it normally is. And as someone that's from Jacksonville, someone that's been to that game consistently throughout my life, I understand what that atmosphere is. And you went down there this past weekend and you looked around, and sure, there were still people down there. They're still having a good time. It was still the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. But you kind of got the sense that it was about 55% Georgia, 45% Florida, and Florida fans were there for a good time. Georgia fans kind of knew that it was going to go the way it was going to go. And the atmosphere, the energy surrounding it was not what it once was, because of the dominance that Georgia's had in the past 2 seasons and ultimately continued in this contest. So it comes down to Florida replicating the success they've had on the recruiting trail, starting to have a bit more presence in the transfer portal to get some veteran leadership in there. Obviously, they did that a little bit this past year with getting Grant Mertz into the program, getting a Cam Jackson, a Caleb Banks. But I feel like that's still missing some of the star pieces that you can acquire out of the transfer portal the way, it doesn't have to be what FSU's done, even though they've done a fantastic job in doing that. But it just takes a little bit more in that area and a sustained product on the recruiting trail to only get the talent needed to be able to defeat Georgia or contend with Georgia. That doesn't even mention the things they have to do correctly on the field, which we haven't seen them do over the past 3 years. And really, in 2020, they found that exploit with the wheel routes and such. And Georgia had a lot of guys out, and I'm not saying that's an excuse, and Florida deserved to win that 2020 matchup, but it just seems as if since Kirby Smart took over at Georgia, you can kind of look at it every year and say, oh yeah, that's a Georgia win. And there is a lot of steps necessary to take moving forward in order to make that not the case anymore, the way it has been since he arrived in Athens. So whether that be, a rapid progression because they just start to take that strong approach in the transfer portal and they kind of make some changes and are able to move forward quicker, I think, or whether it's a process gradual over time, it's still going to take a lot for Florida to rise to the occasion and rise to being anywhere close to defeating Georgia outside of, a potential crazy upset that, many people thought might have happened on Saturday when Florida went down and scored on their first possession. I would like to say I'm not sure if I said it on here. I hope I did. But if I did not, I said because of the way Georgia started slow this season against the Auburns and the South Carolinas and the Vanderbilts, especially specifically on their first drive, they've allowed a lot of points on the first drive before things have gotten fixed very quickly. I thought Florida was going to score first, and then it would turn in Georgia's favor, and they would kind of run away with it. I did think it'd be a bit closer to 34-20. It kind of 43-20 is pretty dang close. I just got 3 and 4 flipped, but just having that glimpse of hope, glimpse of optimism early from the Trey Wilson having his moments in that first drive, and Florida looking like they're a well-oiled machine offensively before the adjustments from Georgia came in and Florida tried to get cute. It definitely was one that you kind of look at and you say, well, yeah, I guess this is just where we are in this rivalry game, where Florida is and where Georgia is. It's not what is needed to kind of bring these intense late game matchups the way many people who have watched this series over time have grown accustomed to. So a lot of steps forward needed for Florida, obviously, specifically in this matchup, and just being able to contend with college football heavyweights moving forward. But Napier came out and said today that there were a lot of good on tape. I just don't personally see how that was the case. I think that sure there were some moments, there were some flashes from guys or from certain areas. Like Florida had a few well executed runs, and Montrell Johnson and Trevor Etienne were kind of having some spurts there, but it was never sustained. It was all one-offs, and then Georgia got things fixed and were able to force punts or turnovers or etc. So there was just a lot going into how this game played out that was just complete domination by the red and black side and not a lot from the orange and blue. So looking at this contest, I do think that there's a necessity for the Gators to evaluate themselves and move forward and kind of understand that the season's not over. This game isn't going to dictate how they perform the rest of the year, because it is a team that hasn't lost in 25 contests now. It's the number one team in the country that has won 2 national championships in a row. But at the same time, you still have to look back and say, that's where, or Billy has to look back and say, this is a program that we want to emulate. And you've kind of seen how in the approach that he's taken, Georgia is a team that he wants to emulate with the power rushing style and the defense leading its charge. But in doing so, there is a lot of things left to accomplish. So I know I was kind of redundant in saying that, but I feel like it's so important to lean into that specifically because of how lopsided this contest was. Because it's, one, lopsided, and two, it's a deflating loss coming off a highly emotional victory against South Carolina 2 weeks ago before the bye, where you said, oh, maybe Florida's starting to turn a corner. Maybe Graham Mertz is starting to figure some things out. And I don't think a lot of the faults should be laid on Graham Mertz's shoulders because of the lack of time he had in the pocket. It was, like I said, that was a season best day of production for that Georgia offensive line. 5 sacks, or 4 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles, etc. But there were so many things that seemed as if they could be kind of swaying in Florida's direction, and you just want to see them be able to bounce back from that as they go in and play Arkansas team that they should beat, and then go into games against LSU, Missouri, and Florida State, trying to get to that 7th victory, which I think could be a sweet spot for Florida, specifically to do what I talked about in acquiring more talent, whether that be from the prep level or the transfer portal after the 2023 season concludes. So thank you all for watching another episode of Carroll's Cadence. I know this wasn't as structured as my usual episodes are. That will return on Wednesday. I'm going to get into an in-depth preview of Florida's basketball season that starts next Monday, exactly a week from today. And I will be there's a lot coming out on basketball. So make sure to stay tuned to allgators.com. I'll leave that link in the description, as well as this channel. Subscribe if you're new. If you're not, give this video a thumbs up. Leave a comment down below. And if you're still watching at this point, DM me on Twitter and just send me the word water. All right, just say water. I want to see if y'all are still tapped in at this point. I'm Brandon Carroll here with another episode of Carroll's Cadence. I will see y'all again on Wednesday. Have a great week, everybody. I love y'all, and I'm out.